Now we get into the meat of things. It was midsummer 1984. It was commercial fishing season, back when there still was a commercial fishing season to speak of. Nowadays, not so much. So during the day, we can imagine they were probably, it was a hot summer day, and there were very few clouds. I looked in the records of the Bellingham Herald for that day. There was even an attempt, I think it was about 80 degrees, which for us Bellinghamians is quite hot. There was an attempt to fry an egg on a sidewalk in downtown Bellingham. I don't think that worked. I doubt if anybody ate eggs on a concrete that day, but it was a hot day, very warm day, and it was still a warm evening when this event occurred. And it started in the pre-dawn hours of July 1984, when something decidedly strange happened. And by the time that the next morning dawned, as darkness turned into daylight on that day, the United States Coast Guard Command in Seattle, Washington, would receive an official report from the Coast Guard station in Bellingham. We do have a Coast Guard station still there, describing an incident regarding, quote, an unidentified flying object south of Lummi Island. So what I'm going to do now, I should probably get my pointer out again and show you exactly where we are. Here is Lummi Island. This is Eliza, if you get it. It's not even named. And here's Anacortes, where some of the sighting was made from, and then there was a fishing vessel going from Anacortes to Lummi Island, just about here at that point. That made the most important aspect of the sighting. Getting my exercise, that's good. So what follows is a sort of recreation of the events comprising the Lummi Island incident as they occurred during those early morning hours of July 27, 1984. The sequence of events is taken primarily from Coast Guard records, which we were able to obtain through our Freedom of Information Act. And so we'll just take it from there. Kind of imagine yourself in the Pacific Northwest, in the Puget Sound, on a boat in Bellingham Bay, where I just indicated with the pointer. It's the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's still warm out. The night sky is reportedly clear. A few scattered clouds, but mostly clear, and the seas were quite calm. Then suddenly, at 3:39 a.m. on July 27, 1984, the United States Coast Guard station in Bellingham receives a call from a local fishing vessel reporting that a, quote, large flaming object throwing sparks landed in the water, creating a large splash approximately 1,500 yards northwest of their boat. The report is radioed in by Richard Dale Hartman. He was the captain of this small fishing vessel. Well, I don't know if it's small, it's about 40, 50 feet, but which was called the Stiva 10. Now this position would place the Splashdown about 1,000 to 1,500 yards off the tip of southern Lummi Island, off of Carter Point. The object's color is reportedly white and orange, and its impact throws up a wall of water about 75 to 100 feet high. The surface of the bay continues to roil and bubble for several minutes following the object's impact. I think Hartman reported it still boiling about 10 minutes after it had impacted. 3:41 a.m. The Bellingham Coast Guard station receives another call. This call is radioed in from the tugboat Dolores, located near Anacortes, where I indicated south of Lummi Island. In fact, it was about 5 miles south of Lummi Island at that point. The crew of the Dolores reports a sighting in the same direction as that witnessed by the Stiva 10, coming west to east. across the northern sound. The crew of the Dolores describes the sighting as somewhat like lightning, yet they also report the skies are completely clear where they are. Here we've got a little bit better close-up of Lummi and Eliza Islands, and we'll go on with the timeline of the reports. 3:50 a.m. Having sped to the scene of the splashdown, the Steva 10, the fishing boat with Captain Hartman aboard, and I believe he only had one crew member with him who also saw it, reports that they searched the area and, quote, sighted no debris but did sight bubbles. So it was still bubbling a little bit when they got there. Apparently, having monitored the Coast Guard calls at about this time, a King 5 News, which is King 5 News is, I think it's the CBS affiliate out of Seattle. It's a major Seattle affiliate, a TV affiliate, puts in a request for information to United States Coast Guard Station, Coast Guard Command in Seattle. 4:28 a.m., this is about a half hour later. Upon further questioning, the crew of the Steva 10 elaborates that the object appeared to drop straight down and then flipped in a kind of U-turn motion and briefly reversed course before dropping again and plunging into the bay. It did sort of a little dipsy doodle before it went in the water. 4:37 a.m. At the request of U.S. Coast Guard Seattle, U.S. Air Force Space Defense, the Coast Guard report refers to Space Defense. Now, I'm not sure if this is U.S. Air Force Space Command or NORAD. It could be either one. I haven't found out which one it is. At any rate, the Coast Guard asked them to check in to see if there were any orbital objects that were whose orbit might have decayed, resulting in such a splashdown. The response of Space Defense, Space Command, NORAD, whichever it was, is in the negative. Quote, "We'll check a few things and call you later," they said. And I have no record of a return call from Space Command or NORAD. So there was no presence of a trackable item coming out of the sky at that point. You may recognize this photo. This was a fireball type object photographed here in Las Vegas in 2004. And I just kind of picked it off the internet because I was looking for a fireball to illustrate the presentation. 4:42 a.m. Richard Dale Hartman, the master of the fishing vessel Steva 10, is taken on board a Bellingham Coast Guard vessel which had been dispatched to the scene, and he proceeds to direct them to the exact spot of the crash site. At this point, 4:50 a.m., so it's 8 minutes later, a third report is filed, this time directly from the Bellingham Coast Guard Station vessel with the Captain Hartman aboard. Quote, according to the Coast Guard report, observed an object, this is another object, or light white in color, moving across the sky from east to west over the south end of Lummi Island. Elevation could not be determined as duration of the event was extremely brief. Intensity was slightly less than that of a parachute illumination flare. So this is a separate sighting as they're going to the spot of the first sighting of the splashdown, going in an opposite direction. 4:55 a.m. Things are happening fast, as you can see. Seattle Coast Guard asks Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, this is down by Anacortes where I showed you before, if they saw anything on radar about 3:45 a.m. Now, Whidbey Island Naval Air Station was then and still is a key military installation located between Seattle and the Canadian border in the Puget Sound. After a thorough investigation, Whidbey Island responded to this report right away in the negative. They did not see anything on their radar at that time. After a thorough investigation, the Federal Aviation Administration office at Bellingham International Airport subsequently confirms that it had no reports of missing planes during this time period, and it showed nothing on its radar or in its tracking. 5:18 a.m., the Bellingham Coast Guard vessel completes its search of the splashdown area. No object nor any debris has been found. Officer in charge, Rich Rogala, later tells the local daily newspaper, the Bellingham Herald, that there are no further plans to investigate the incident. And here's I just wanted to put up a copy of the Coast Guard reports that we have received. It's kind of a copy, and parts of it were kind of hard to decipher. It's in Coast Guard speak, so you have to kind of wade through it. But it's all there. It's all documented. So now we're getting into later on the next morning after sunrise, 9:45 a.m. The U.S. Coast Guard Bellingham receives a call from the Whatcom County Department of Emergency Services, quote, requesting transportation to area of report for radiac readings. So they were concerned that there might be some radioactivity in the area following this event. A little over an hour later, a Coast Guard vessel was dispatched with 2 Whatcom County Department of Emergency Services personnel on board. Whatcom County is the northwesternmost county in Washington State and does contain parts of northern Puget Sound, including Lummi Island. 11:20 a.m. to 12:29 p.m., the Coast Guard vessel is positioned near the southern Lummi Island's shoreline. For over an hour, the shoreline is scanned for radioactivity. No positive readings are found. Now, subsequently, from the news accounts of July 27th in the local media, we have Rich Rogala, the officer in charge of the Bellingham Coast Guard Station. I mentioned him earlier. He concludes that, and he tells the media, it probably was a flock of geese. No, I'm kidding. I had to throw that in there. He says, quote, it probably was a meteorite. It seems to me to be the logical explanation. Then we have Seattle Coast Guard Chief Petty Officer Gene Hoff describing the overall conclusion of the event as one involving, quote, an unidentified flying object. Here's Dominic Papetti aboard the fishing vessel Diane. Now we're getting into the retrieval mission, private retrieval mission that took about 5 months to get together the equipment and the funding and so forth and so on. And they still didn't have sufficient funds to do all the things they wanted to do. But let's dive right in, so to speak. Now again, this was December 30th, the very tail end of 1984, beginning of 1985. And in contrast to the summer of 1984, at this point in time, Bellingham had just suffered a huge snowstorm. They were digging out from under. The snow had stopped and it had been followed by brutal northeast winds, which had cleared the skies completely. So we have clear skies again. And so we are looking at good weather, basically. Cold weather, but good weather. So near the end of the year, in the cold, crisp light of day, a boat and crew set forth to discover what had happened during that warm summer night back in July. So this is December 30, 1984. After 5 months of organizing and trying to scrape together funds and equipment, a team of divers from Emerald Marine Service in Seattle, and I cannot find any record of Emerald Marine Service existing today, so that's one of the dead ends I've come up against, finally mounts an attempt to reconnoiter the mysterious object that crashed into Bellingham Bay. The team is directed by Sam Sidori. Trying to locate him might have a lead on that, and features 2 experienced divers, John Walker and Richard Burke. Together, they charter a 58-foot fishing vessel, the Diane, you see pictured here, captained by longtime fisherman and Whatcom County resident Dominic Papetti, and I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing Dominic. He is about as down to earth as you can get. He's a typical old salt fisherman kind of guy and was very straightforward in his answers, had nothing to hide, and was very curious about the whole thing. At first, as the crew searches the outskirts of the splashdown area, they find nothing. But then, on a second pass, something is located by the boat's depth finder. It's an object about 10 feet high and 30 feet wide, and it appears to be wedged into the bottom of the bay at about a 45-degree angle. According to Papetti, the bay floor where the object is located is completely smooth, and I talked to him down at the Bellingham Harbor, and we were standing in the parking lot, and he said it's about as smooth as this parking lot here. Throughout the ensuing retrieval attempt, Dominic Papetti recalls watching unmarked airplanes circle constantly overhead. There was no communication between the boat and the planes, and he always wondered, what the heck are those planes doing up there? Usually the local TV stations have their logos and names emblazoned all over the helicopters and planes they use, so we don't know who that was. So therefore, the Diane parked above its quarry and the recovery effort began. And here, of course, is an actual photo of the recovery effort. No, this is a somewhat fanciful artist rendition that appeared in an issue of Clipson magazine, which is a magazine put out by Western Washington University, our big university up there in Bellingham. Excellent article. I don't know about the artwork, though, but it was chock full of information. Diver John Walker dives first, and Dominic remembers that these divers, he thinks they had military training. They may have been SEALs, something along that order. So these were experienced guys, knew what they were doing. John Walker dives first. He reports seeing a metallic gold-colored object shaped like a satellite dish. This is from '84, so those things were pretty big, you know, the big old honkers. With a clasp on one end. The object appears to have a 4-inch lip running around its outer edge. He tells the media later, quote, "It's not a boat and it's not a plane. It's not a rock and it's not wood." Richard Burke dives next. He reports standing upon an object shaped like an upside-down teacup. He describes seeing an oval-shaped hatch or cavity. Oddly, there is no sea growth at all on the object, despite the fact it's been down there for over 5 months. Burke takes some footage with an underwater video camera. They brought a video camera with them, but guess what happened? He also brought a spotlight down there, and the spotlight refused to work. It shut down. Still, despite this setback, Burke exclaims into his helmet radio, "Woo-wee! I'm standing on a UFO." Also at this point, as he's standing on the object, he claims to hear or sense a humming sound emanating from the thing. Burke, a seasoned diver, is so excited to relate his findings to the Diane's crew that he quickly returns to the service without pausing to decompress. When he reaches the boat, Burke is bleeding from the nose and the mouth and shows signs of a pretty good case of the bends. Those on board notice that Burke's boots are covered with a reddish type substance, dirt, rust, we don't know, presumably picked up when he stood on the object. Now, I believe a sample of this substance was sent to the University of Washington for examination, and the results came back inconclusive, whatever that means. I mean, either it's dirt or it's rust or it's inconclusive. I don't know what to make of that. So they returned to shore really quick to see to Richard Burke's welfare, and they take a look at the film that he took. It shows nothing. There was no light. There wasn't enough light. So that all went for naught. And it turns out that evening they had a meeting. There was some kind of acrimonious debate as they were evaluating what to do next. And John Walker either was tossed off the team or left. So he had to be replaced, but they decided to go out the next day and see if they could maybe dislodge the object and bring it up somehow. They replaced Walker with another diver from Emerald Marine Service out of Seattle. He came up from Seattle. His name was J.R. Hoyrup. He takes Walker's place. Hoyrup and Burke set sail for the splashdown site again aboard the Diane with Dominic Papetti. And this time the Diane's depth finder detects nothing at all in the area where the target was located just the day before. Both Burke and Hoyrup dive all around the vicinity, but to no avail. The object has apparently vanished. In the early days of 1985, around the 1st to the 5th of 1985, a longtime Lummi Island businessman, William Cummins, I know Bill, he's a great guy. He has since become has developed quite the interest in UFOs. He starts asking questions about, he wanders around the marina, the harbor area, and asks questions. Did you see anything funny happen between the first and the second time that the Diane went out and to check things out? And he finds out that a number of people witnessed a large vessel steam from the south to the north and anchor over the very spot where Dominic Papetti and his crew on the Diane had anchored earlier. This was in the middle of the night that this ship came. Everyone could see the running lights, huge vessel. Most of them seemed to think it was a NOAA vessel, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration vessel. Apparently stayed there in the middle of the night for, anchored over that spot for a few hours and then just steamed south again. So, what do we make of that? January 21st, 1985. According to a letter from Donald Johnson, and here's the exact copy of that letter up on the screen there. Donald Johnson, the Washington State Director of MUFON. Diver Richard Burke is reportedly willing to undergo a polygraph examination. Efforts are initiated to raise funds for the lie detector test to be administered, and I still haven't found out if they ever gave him the test or if he passed it or what happened with that. Still looking into that, one of the many ongoing parts of this investigation. So let's quickly summarize the evidence. We have a splashdown of an object in the early morning hours of July 27, 1984. Again, a large object trailing fire, spewing sparks, about 1,000 to 1,500 yards southern end of Lummi Island, near the area known as Carter Point. This is verified by the eyewitnesses whose descriptions are congruent. The U.S. Coast Guard was so convinced that something had crashed into the waters of Bellingham Bay that they dispatched a vessel to reconnoiter the object's point of entry that very night. They were primarily concerned, I guess since they got no confirmation from Whidbey Naval Air Station or NORAD Space Command, the Coast Guard's main concern was that a plane had gone down, and that's why they were looking for debris on the surface and, of course, any possible survivors or whatever. The retrieval attempts, we know there was at least one and possibly another. The boat captain and divers involved in the private recovery mission, they located an object, they dove upon it. One of the guys was willing to take a polygraph. They seemed to have nothing to gain from lying about it. And so we have an object located. Both divers claimed to have observed and or stood on the object, which was metallic and not recognizable to them, seasoned divers, and certainly not indigenous to the seafloor. So we have an unknown physical object that was discovered at this point in time in the exact area where the splashdown of the unidentified flying object had occurred. Then we have the mystery ship. And I included this article here, which just came out about a week ago in the Bellingham Herald, to just show you that there is a NOAA base in Seattle, in the Seattle region, and they do often have missions mapping the seafloor. So there could have been a NOAA vessel dispatched to check this thing out. It's another thing I need to look into. Long list, getting longer. So the very next day after their amazing discovery, the crew of the Diane returned to the same spot and found absolutely nothing. Had the mystery ship taken it away? Maybe. Now we're going to look into possible explanations, and we can throw out a few of them right away. Meteorological. Throughout the northern Puget Sound at that time, the weather was described as anything from completely clear to clear with a few scattered clouds, so it's very unlikely this could be attributed to a meteorological event such as lightning. Astronomical. Was it a meteor? I have combed the internet sources I can find, and there were no meteor showers recorded at that particular point in time, no Leonid, no Perseid showers. Could have been one or two rogue meteorites, I suppose, but based on the way the object performed, that is unlikely. Was it a plane crash? No. There was no debris, there was no evidence of any missing planes, nothing of the sort. There's a theory, perhaps it was a hoax. My feeling is if this was a hoax, it was a damn poor one. They didn't come up with any faked evidence, no fake photos, no artifacts. That they were in it. They said from the beginning, the outset, the divers, Sam Sidori, they were in it to make money off this thing. They were hoping to bring it back up and to maybe sell it back to the military or something. I don't know what they were thinking, but if that was their reason for doing this, and they wanted to hoax the whole thing, they could have come up with something. They could have done a hell of a lot better than that. And also, why would diver Richard Burke agree to submit to a polygraph test in January of 1985 if he's hoaxing, if he's part of the hoax? And this kind of segues into our next slide. Take note of this object on this slide, though. This is a Zenit 8 Cosmos Soviet satellite. It was still the Soviet Union in 85. Could this be the object that crashed into the bay? Was it space junk, perhaps one of those satellites? Again, we have two military, both NAS Whidbey Island and either Space Command and or NORAD. Tracking sources indicated no presence of orbital objects re-entering Earth's atmosphere, planned or unplanned at this particular place or point in time. Also, the Zenit 8 Cosmos reconnaissance satellite that I showed on the previous slide is about half the size of the object reported by the divers and seen and detected by the depth finder. So maybe size does matter. I just don't think it's big enough. It doesn't quite fit the description. It's tempting because what Walker described looks a little bit like the camera bays, look a little bit like hatches. It has the rim running around it. It was gold in color, although I probably wouldn't be so gold after coming down in such a precipitous manner with trailing flame and sparks. But I don't think these satellites have the capability of doing a flip-flop maneuver before they land in the water. So unlikely. There was a theory that it had been carried away. Was it taken away by the mysterious vessel, the possible NOAA vessel? Was it dragged away by someone else's fishing net? Well, who's going to be fishing in the middle of the night in mid-December? Not too many fish out there, not too many people at that time. So how did this thing escape notice from the military, from Space Command, NORAD? Was it a secret Soviet satellite? What, if anything, did the NOAA vessel find? Had the object already vanished by the time the NOAA vessel reached the area? Or maybe it simply floated away. When Burke stood on the object, did he dislodge it? Well, pretty good-sized object, don't think so. It seemed to be wedged in there fairly firmly, despite the fact the currents in that area are quite strong. So that's very doubtful. Then we have the UFO theory. It would seem that neither the original sighting of the object streaking into Bellingham Bay on July 27, 1984, nor the subsequent locating and reconnoitering of it on December 30, 1984, can be reasonably disputed. What happened to it? What happened to the vexing thing? No one seems to know. Dominic Papetti, when I interviewed him, as I mentioned earlier, he is still puzzled about this. He is now retired from fishing, but in the years following 1984, when he was still active, he told me whenever he was going through that area, he would just kind of steer his boat in the direction of the spot where they located the object and just check it out, just to see if it had come back or anything. He still wonders what happened. The divers, I have not been able to locate them. Dominic doesn't know what happened to them. In Dominic's words, maybe something came out of the sky that wasn't supposed to. Well, maybe so. He said, the object, the divers, everything just disappeared. That's the title of the discussion/study group that I'm the alleged director of, have been for about 18 years now. We began as the Bellingham UFO group in 1988. Began with a group of about a dozen folks who met in my old apartment, and we used to rent videos and watch UFO videos and discuss things, put together our experiences and come up with theories and turn around ideas, that kind of thing. And we soon began realizing, after we did this for about 3 or 4 months, that there's a lot more to this. And we started looking into, from UFOs, we went to near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, alternative anthropology, spirituality, hypnotherapy, meditation, Sasquatch, Chupacabra, Earth, Mars, and on beyond. And the evidence just kept mounting up that all these things seem to be somehow interrelated, and we ought to look into all of them without narrowing our focus so much that we would have blinders on, such as mainstream science may. Our thought at Contact, and the reason we call the group Contact is because, well, it sounds really neat, but it's kind of a contraction of the center, because we like to call ourselves a center, and ontology, which is from my old days studying philosophy. Ontology is the study of being, as epistemology is the study of knowledge and so forth. Ontology is the study of being, and I figured, well, we're studying who we are as human beings, and so therefore we are looking into where we might be going, how we might react to contact experiences such as close encounters, spiritual experiences, ghostly experiences, out-of-body experiences. How do we respond to these things as human beings? Because it became apparent that due to the huge volume of witness testimony and an increasing body of evidence, it seems like the human species is now, and probably has been since our inception, with energies and beings from beyond our normal paradigm. So given this conclusion, we began to ask questions like, what do we do now? What do we do with the fact that we're having these experiences? How do we evaluate them? How do we incorporate them into our reality? And that's where action comes in. I call it the energetic process of evolution, the evolution of human consciousness. In short, I've always felt that through contact experiences, we as human beings are being invited to evolve. And my suggestion is that we accept that invitation. So, I have copies of our alleged mission statement up here, so if after the talk you want to grab a copy of that, that's fine. But I mentioned in the mission statement that to be human is to change, to grow, to become, to embrace ourselves, others, and the world around us, all together on this wondrous wheel of life. Our task is to study this transition from human beings to human becomings. Again, the action idea. We are becoming something new. And we invite you to come along with us on this journey of the evolution of consciousness. And together, perhaps we can turn the wheel of life into a new direction and dimension. Now, a little bit about why I'm here, I think why we're all here, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we go about it. When I first presented this talk in its much abbreviated form in June of 2005, I was following a talk by Lloyd Pye, and that was kind of a tough act to follow. Are most of you familiar with Lloyd Pye and his research into human origins and hominids and that sort of thing? He's quite a researcher. He's one of those guys that tends to stir a lot of controversy, but I think most of us do in these fields. And he had a great many things to say about the origin of the human species and our ongoing evolutionary involvement with beings from elsewhere. His current project is called the Star Child Project. He has, a few years ago, he was given a skull which seems to be possibly some sort of indicate some sort of missing link between us as human beings and perhaps an extraterrestrial origin. So he's working on that. But I think what I most admire Lloyd for, no matter, irregardless, not even a word, regardless of what you think of his conclusions or what direction he may be taking, what I most admire about him and all of the researchers here, and I think probably all the people in this room actually, is that we are pursuing true science. Mainstream science. What does mainstream science do when it comes up against things like UFOs, ghosts, cryptozoology, any of these topics outside the purview of mainstream science? Well, they don't do much. They don't do science. They don't look at the evidence. They don't properly discuss the theories. They don't follow the process of science when it comes to these kinds of things, which are important things to look into insofar as they define an aspect of human consciousness that is very real, that is among us, that's experienced by most of us in one form or another. And the only real response from mainstream science to these ideas, to these fields of study, seems to be defense mechanism, debunking, denial, and even defaming those who bring forward these theories. I think of folks like John Mack in the UFO field, the way he was so horribly treated by his colleagues at Harvard. And that's not by any means a unique case. This tends to happen, and it's very unfortunate. I think those of us in this room can sort of pat ourselves on the back. I think we follow a path of what I like to call true science, and that is we seek to rediscover and redefine reality through both the objective and imaginative examination of evidence and experience. That is, we're not afraid to look into these things. We're not afraid to look at the evidence. We're not afraid to take the eyewitness testimony, to examine thank you, to examine the experiences of others and take them at face value and not say, they're nuts, oh, it's all hallucinations, oh, it's a manifestation of some kind of mass paranoia or hypnosis or something. No, we need to take the path of actually examining these experiences and these ideas in the spirit of scientific thought. And there follows the idea of inclusion. And I think this is also important because whether it's ufology, anthropology, archaeoastronomy, regardless of what field you're in, I think we all have a tendency, whether it's ego-driven or whatever, to stick to one aspect of the field and say, this is mine. I know what the meaning of this part is, And I think that's unfortunate. I think we need to include all sorts of possible theories, all sorts of approaches, and be open to all the variety of phenomena, all the possibilities. And we need to break down those territorial barriers that can cause this infighting, these little ego turf wars, that it's so unfortunate. It's also happens in mainstream science too. And I think we need to avoid that. We are up against an establishment that walks in lockstep and is funded corporately to the tune of billions of dollars, and they are not going to treat us with any kind of respect whatsoever unless we start treating ourselves with respect and moving forward in the spirit of inclusion. And so I put that final phrase in there, the surrender of agenda. It's kind of like the Thriller in Manila. I like that phrase. We need to, those of us who have adopted a certain agenda, this is true about UFOs, this is true about Sasquatch, and we have this in all these fields. We recently helped host a Sasquatch research conference in Bellingham. Gosh, we had about, 24 speakers, and it was a 2-3 day ordeal. So I can sympathize, Ryan, with what you're going through now. And they, believe it or not, they had to have on separate days in separate locations. Here were the speakers that were dealing with the biological aspects of Sasquatch, and here were the speakers that were dealing with the spiritual aspects. Is it an interdimensional being, whatever. They couldn't even share the same stage. And that I find problematic. And I'm sure it's one of the reasons that mainstream science just looks at us and go, they can't even get their own act together. Why should we listen to them? And so you have, and I think we have the same thing here in the field of ufology. And we need to avoid that. The mainstream science is so hardened in what they believe and how they defend their paradigm that basically they feel they know the truth just because it is the truth. When we ask them, well, why can't there be beings or energies from elsewhere, or possibly elsewhere, encroaching upon our reality? No, that just can't happen. Why not? Because it doesn't happen. Why not? Because it can't happen. And it becomes a circuitous logic, and because they are the valiant defenders of the paradigm, and they've got all the funding and the huge castle behind them and all that, it's hard to go up against that unless we do it as a unified force. So I think we need to put on a unified front. Asking these questions is a fundamental, essential human activity, and I think that's the only way we're going to learn what is real, to determine what our reality is, where our consciousness is going, and where we're going to be in the future. And so I think in the spirit of inclusion, we've got to move forward, and it is in the spirit of true science that I present these findings. Here endeth the first lesson. Amen. I think that's my ministerial side coming out. Speaking of true scientists, here's one example, I think. Ivan Sanderson was on both sides of the fence. He began his career as a naturalist, wrote many books, and did lots of studies on all sorts of animals and creatures and civilizations and so forth. And then he started branching out a bit, shall we say. Wrote the book Invisible Residents, which I'm in the process of rereading now, and where he goes into the theory that maybe there is a civilization or civilizations that live in bases under our oceans, and this might account for all the underwater UFO activity, UFOs going into the water, coming out of the water, skimming along the water. Fascinating book. Not sure about the theory, but he put it out there. He wasn't afraid to do it. Some people thought Ivan was quite the curmudgeon, but he, like I said, he wasn't afraid to put his theories out there and challenge the paradigm. And I think we owe true scientists like Ivan Sanderson a huge debt of gratitude. Now, perhaps it's the old anthropologist studier in me that's peeking out behind the curtain, but I've always felt that it's important to look into the physical and cultural background of an area in order to inform the debate about what happened in that area. So I'll just give you a really brief synopsis of Lummi Island, Washington. It's in the northern part of Puget Sound. It's really, Lummi Island was kind of the result of I guess you'd call it a schizophrenic geological event. As you look at this slide, you're looking from from the northern end to the south. The northern end was formed from magma that came up from the crust about 160 million years ago. And the southern end was the result of kind of a subduction event where one plate came above another and is made up primarily of sandstone. And that happened about 140 million years ago. Interesting thing, when glaciers covered Puget Sound, I think this was about 10 million years ago, they seem to have sort of parted around where you see the Lummi Peak, which is at the southern end of the island, and there's little or no evidence of any glaciation on the southern end, which is a little bit strange. Oh, and I should show you where the incident that occurred, that we're going to be talking about, occurred. Hopefully I don't fall down. I might need a spotter here. I'm about as graceful as an elephant. Here's the southern tip of Lummi Island. Here's Eliza Island, and the object is down right about there. As far as the cultural history of Lummi Island, its first known inhabitants were the Lummi people. They are part of the Coast Salish tribal group. Their primary economy was reef net fishing. The salmon were so plentiful in those days that they had no problem sustaining their culture and their people with salmon fishing and a little bit of logging. In about 1770 to 1790, we had the first British and Spanish explorers enter the region, and about 50 years later, the first real settlers came and settled the land, and of course it's been all downhill since. Today, there aren't many Lummi people on the island itself. They mostly inhabit the mainland, just north of Bellingham, where I'm from. There's a huge reservation, the Lummi Reservation, and of course, a huge casino. And the reservation borders Bellingham Bay. They still do salmon fishing, but the salmon are not very plentiful at all anymore due to over-harvesting and canning by the first settlers. Pretty much within 100 years, the salmon runs were dissipated. So there's still a bit of, as far as the south end of the island, there's still a bit of quarrying, not on the south end, but more toward the center of the island. The vast majority of the population is on the north end of the island, and that's where you'll find some farmers. There's lots of lavender farms, herb growers, berry farms. It's kind of an artist's colony now. There's some writers, sculptors, and tons of tourists. It's a big tourist spot. So, where we're looking at the event on the southern part of Lummi Island on Carter Point at the very southern tip, it's, as far as I know, completely uninhabited. And Eliza Island, just to the east, you can't see it on this map, has a few homes on it, but you can't. There's no access by ferry. You would have to have a personal watercraft or a plane. And we do have some rich folks who live in the Puget Sound that do have their own float planes and so forth. So there are some people on Eliza Island, but for the most part, this is one of the least populated areas of Puget Sound, that particular spot. Okay.